Hi guys, welcome to your Grade 9 analysis of Inspector Goole from an Inspector Calls in preparation for your English Literature GCSE exam. Again, this is just Grade 9, it's by no means everything you need. If you want a more detailed video, please check out my other video on the Inspector. This is just going to look at a few quotes in terms of what do we do to hit the Grade 8 and the Grade 9. Before we do anything, you've got to remember that Priestley's play is political and moral, so the Inspector serves to be an allegorical message, and you need that in all of your answers really. So the Inspector is used as a proxy for Priestley's political beliefs, obviously socialism. He also represents moral value, which we're going to discuss in just a second. In terms of Inspector Goole, he actually functions in a hybrid of different ways. He is the catalyst, so he speeds up the events in the play through his interrogation of each character. He also addresses the time on quite a few different occasions, and again it almost hurries the Berlins into confessing. He is the moral subconscious of the characters, therefore he reveals things that they didn't realise they thought, particularly Sheila and Eric. Obviously he's an interrogator and he puts them under mass pressure. He's a moral teacher and he's going to teach us lessons about moral value and as a society what we should, what characteristics we should value, i.e. social responsibility. He's obviously the voice of B Priestley, as I mentioned. Some students will question whether he's real, and if he is a Goole, then why is it? And this goes back to Charles Dickens in A Christmas Carol and the idea that the supernatural haunts people into changing. So if you've done A Christmas Carol, the three ghosts and Marley haunt Scrooge into changing, much like is going to happen here. And he is omniscient, meaning he sees everything and he knows everything, especially historical events. If we move to morality then, because political issues are going to be quite easy there, he is interested in morality, but he aligns it with criminals and crime, which we're going to see when Gerald says that they're not criminals. He exposes the immoral behaviour of every character. That means the following, and if you look at the 7 deadly sins, then it mirrors. Mr. Berlin represents greed and pride. Obviously greed when he's talking about higher costs and low prices, and pride when he's talking about his name. Eric is lust and greed. Greed, he steals the money from Mr. Berlin. Lust is that he forces himself onto Eva Smith. Sheila is jealous / envy. We know that. She actually says it. If she'd been some plain miserable little creature, I don't suppose I would have done it. Gerald is lust because he treats her in the same way as Eric, and Mrs. Berlin is greed and pride as well. More so pride because remember she said she was Mrs. Berlin, and that notion of that it's offensive. So as I say, another thing the Inspector does is that he places morality and moral value above manners and above social position, and therefore when Mr. Berlin's like, oh, I play golf with the constable, he ignores social position because it's not a value, it doesn't make us any better in terms of people, and it certainly doesn't help society. He outlines the idea that the way they treat her is a crime against humanity. If you can get that line in again, you're heightening your answer. And again, he symbolically sends a message about capitalism. So if you think, well, the way they're treating Eve is a crime, then capitalism becomes a crime. He acts as a teacher throughout the play, a moral teacher, as I've discussed. So think about, as a 1940s audience viewing the play and an audience now viewing the play, what we learn. This is an example of how we hit the 9 through language analysis. Pause the video if you need, but your stage directions, and I always get my class to start with stage directions because it's a play, say the following. He speaks carefully, weightily, and has a disconcerting habit of looking hard at the person he addresses before actually speaking. We'll want carefully and weightily, and remember when he first enters the play, it says massiveness. So weightily and massiveness are a lexical field associated with size. Now that means that when he speaks, his words carry a deeper meaning, and also if something's heavy, it suggests something burdensome. Now it's a burden to Sheila and Eric because of what they've done and the guilt that they feel. So again, he displays that idea, and they can alleviate this burden by confessing and repenting their sins. Carefully and weightily show that he is selfless in his thoughts and his forethought. That is a direct juxtaposition to the opening description of Mr. Berlin, where he's provincial and pretentious, so he's narrow-minded and he thinks he's important. It also shows us as well that he's really considered what he's going to teach them, and again he juxtaposes the stupid predictions of Mr. Berlin about the war and about the Titanic. Another stage direction is your change in lighting. So it goes from pink and intimate, which metaphorically shows that the Berlin family are living in this silly bubble, and that's why they don't understand what's happening with poverty and things like that. But when the inspector arrives, and look, we get a comment there to really emphasise this notion, it's going to get brighter and harder. So again, this is an example of what we could write. So please, if you need to take a shot or pause the video, do so. I would write something like this. The next juxtaposition presenting the inspector as the foil to the Berlins is the contrast in lighting. If you haven't done foils before, it means opposing characters. Metaphorically, it acts to imply that they are caught in their own selfish bubble. Furthermore, the adjectives brighter and harder have numerous interpretations, one being that he will shine a light on the terrible actions and behaviours of the family. Secondly, the word harder literally means solid, firm and rigid, not easily broken or with a great deal of effort. Clearly, the inspector is not going to be manipulated or intimidated by the social position of Mr. Berlin, and he will also try to change the moral and political beliefs of these characters and indeed the audience. So again, the examiner wants you to say a lot about a little, so we've took some single words there and we've really analysed what that means about the character of the inspector. Arguably, and again it's an argument, absolutely ignore me if you don't think, you could potentially argue that he comes across as feminist. He says, like a lot of these young women, and then he repeats it later, we try to put ourselves in the place of these young women counting their pennies in their dingy back bedrooms. And there's a contrast of youth and dingy, this awful idea that she's a young woman but she lives in this dingy place. And then again, sorry, my picture's gone over the text, but basically if they are living off pennies, then we have a desperation and poverty is heightened because we absolutely can't survive on pennies. And then again, it shows you the injustice of Mr. Berlin and the injustice of capitalism. How else does he describe her? Burnt her inside out. Now that would be shocking in 1912 to describe a woman like this, and it is Sheila, remember, who reacts and says, oh stop it, you know, that's awful, and doesn't like to hear it. It's detailed, it's grotesque, and it's used to shock. This horrendous notion that the bleach has burnt her from the inside out. It's obviously painful. What the inspector then does through these descriptions is he points out who is most vulnerable in a society that has capitalist beliefs, and obviously it's your Eva Smith, your Daisy Renton, your women, your poor women, or your poor. Capitalist exploitation, we're obviously going to do that in the obvious quote, which is high costs and low prices, and the fact that he denies her a pay rise. But this is a good one as well that often gets overlooked. The inspector says to Mr. Berlin, it is better to ask for the earth than to take it. Now, if you do that metaphorically and symbolically, then we've got this over-exaggerated idea that capitalism is ruining the earth. So again, you've got that symbolic meaning, but also it's the other idea that the Berlins have taken the earth, so it's better to ask for the earth than just to take it. So we've got this sin of greed highlighted again, and if the Berlins have ruined her, then what has capitalism done to society as a whole? There's always a bigger message there. His omniscient power, then we know that he knows what every character has done. And then you get this stage direction. He looks at Gerald, pause, then at Eric, pause, then at Sheila. Your pauses heighten the idea that he's staring heavily at them, which links you back to your stage direction of he has a disconcerting habit of looking at somebody quite harshly. Unfortunately, as we know, there's an undertone here. Now, this is where we go further again. There is an assumption when he looks at each of these people that all upper-class citizens exploit the poor. Because remember, this is symbolic. So if Eric's doing it, and Gerald's doing it, and Sheila's doing it, and they are metaphorically representative of the upper class, then they're all doing it. And that's going to take us to this, which is the criminal behaviour, which I mentioned earlier. Gerald says, we're respectable citizens, we're not criminals. Now, the inspector is really sharp in his response, and he says, I wouldn't know where to draw the line between a respectable citizen and a criminal, and there's the blurred boundary between what the Berlins are doing and crimes. There's a suggestion that capitalism and the rich, as I say, become criminals because they can exploit, and that is a criminal behaviour in terms of B Priestley and obviously the inspector. Interesting as well, because Eric is a criminal because he's forced himself on a woman and he's stolen. He's kept arguably a mistress on the side, so there is instances of a blurred line between what is a crime and what is the rich abusing their position. And again, we can link this to, you needn't give me any rope. So it's the foreshadowing the notion that eventually the upper class will reveal their immoral and criminal behaviour. So the rope here is this idea that they're murderers. So again, we've gone further. They are killing the poor, if you like. So think about that as an extended symbolic idea. The rope obviously is that he needn't give us any rope. Becomes that Sheila says that they're going to hang themselves in the end. So we've got to start asking ourselves, who is suffering? As he speaks, he uses emotive language when he describes Eva's death and her position when she's alive. So he plays on emotions here. He says the triple friendless, penniless and desperate. Then he also says she needed not only money but advice, sympathy and friendliness. So triple there and triple here. It really solidifies the notion that this woman is so desperate that she's going to drink bleach, which is a painful end. And it heightens the imagery of earlier where she burnt her inside out, because it links, this is why she's done that. We've also, if you're doing a question on Eva Smith, got this idea that she's lonely, she's poor, and then desperation as in, this is how I'm going to kill myself. Advice, she needed advice. She went to Mrs. Berlin's charity. She needed sympathy. She got a little bit from Gerald, not much. Eric didn't give her any, Sheila didn't give her any, Mrs. Berlin didn't give her any, Mr. Berlin didn't give her any. And it's the ignorance of the upper class to the lower class, the fact that they don't realise they're there, and that comes from the bubble of the pink and intimate staging. And don't forget, guys, we don't ever change staging, so that heightens the idea that the Berlins are stuck in their world. A lot on this slide, so please just press pause. It is just stage directions, all associated with the inspector. Have a look. So if we're talking about the role of the inspector, cutting in is used loads. This idea of physically cutting off Mr. Berlin, he has more power than him. We've also got massively taking charge. Look at your adverb, massively. Again, a power balance between Mr. Berlin and the inspector as foils, and it seems like the inspector's winning. Not only that, where Mr. Berlin loses his temper and Mrs. Berlin loses that temper, the inspector never does, because he's the moral subconscious, and actually he almost acts as the law here, pointing out things. Slowly, impressively, we can see that he's having a massive impact on Sheila and Eric. In terms of catalyst, and as I said before, I haven't much time. He references looking at his watch, and we can interpret this in a couple of ways. He has to prevent the death of Eva. Now stay with me. Your narrative means she hasn't died yet, because she's going to die at the end and we're going to get the phone call. There's two deaths of Eva Smith. One at the beginning and the one at the end. So again, he works quickly because he has to prevent the second death from occurring, which he doesn't. But also, you can start, I always think you should hire a question to the examiner to make them think you're thinking. So I've put here, is it about society changing quickly for the betterment of everyone else? So is the inspector acting quickly because we need a new government? And in 1945 and in 1946, we replaced the Conservative Party with the Labour Party. Is that what we need? And I don't know what year it is when you watch this video, it was 2018, we're currently living under a Conservative government. You just need to look at how they are treating the NHS, how they are treating the healthcare system and the poor, to realise that society's got to change. Remember what you did, he repeats a couple of times. Therefore, remember becomes an imperative. Now, it's Eric and Sheila who say, oh, we're not likely to forget. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Berlin at the end, like, ha ha ha, what a joke. We'll all laugh in the morning. So they don't remember. Now, the repetition of this shows that some of the Berlins and the upper class don't remember their own actions, and they certainly don't remember the consequences of their actions. Look at Eric at the beginning. He's not drinking because he's concerned about Eva. So again, this idea that they forget that they are mistreating other people within society. He structures the events. Every single event in the play is structured around the inspector. Each revelation moves the play forward. So in Act 1, we've got Berlin, then Sheila, then we've got Gerald and Mrs. Berlin, and then we've got Eric. Think about the structure. Why is Eric last? Is he the worst? He heightens the drama with the way he enters and exits. Like when Sheila and Gerald are arguing, he enters. Why? Tension. It creates a maximum tension, like I've just said. They're in the middle of this conversation about Gerald's affair. Then the inspector will walk in. Why? Because he knows what Gerald's done. He's going to reveal it, because Sheila's trying to get it out of him and he doesn't want to reveal that. Massive quote. Fire, blood and anguish is repeated by Sheila. So watch my Sheila video. There's a couple of things there on a grade 9 for her. It's a metaphor that refers to the 2 world wars that we've suffered. The ruling class don't learn. So we've got a Conservative government in World War I and we've got a Conservative government in World War II. So they haven't learned their lesson. So we've got the two world wars which parallel the 2 deaths of Eva Smith at the beginning and the end, make that link. And guess what? She dies at the end of the play as well as at the beginning. Also, if you want to go religiously, it's a reference to hell, and therefore we've got eternal punishment. You are sent to hell when you don't repent your sins, and you are eternally punished for your behaviour. Therefore, what is Priestley's message about capitalism then? Does it need to be punished? Any other quotations you need, please check my other inspector video. I hope this has helped you in terms of how do we hit a grade 9 with the role of the inspector. Please check my YouTube channel for anything else that you might need, and massive good luck in your AQA exam.